Today's daf is daf Yud Zayin, and the last thing that we learned in the previous Mishnah was a machlekes of Rab Shimon and the Chachamim, which we are going to explain right now. Where Rab Shimon says that how much do you have to eat in order to be chayiv? He said even a koshehu. Knows how much you have to eat from tevel. If you didn't produce all the different types of a mashu. And the Chachamim say it has to be what do you call it? It has to be a kazais. And Rav Shimon says, well, why don't you count the wheat as a berya? And we know that a berya, if it's an independent creation, that's how it is, it's considered significant, and we don't care about the share because that's the full size. So count that as a berya. What does the Chacham respond to that? So let's go to the Gemara here. If you Zayin Omid Aleph, we're up to the two dots, about 10 lines from the top of the page. Comes along and a BB in the name of Shimon Lakish. He says, Machlekes bechita, the whole Machlekes is by wheat, because Rav Shimon says that a stalk of wheat is a berya, and therefore it should be sufficient to be chayiv if you ate it before you gave truma and so on. And if you chayiv, and the Chacham say no, it's less than the kazais, you're not chayiv. But when it comes to flour, because you ground it, it's no longer in the original state. So even if Shimon is made, well, how much flour do you have to eat of a table for your mouth? Is a kazais. However, Rabbi says in the name of the Shlakish, Amar Shimon Lakish, Kim machlekes bezu, kach machlekes bezu. Rabbi Shimon holds that even the slightest amount you're chayiv, even if it's not a berya. How in the world are you going to explain that in our Mishnah when clearly he raises the idea of a berya? Once you ground it up, it's no longer a berya. So we'll see in a minute. Tonight we learn, we learn the Mishnah. In other words, his whole basis is predicated on the rules of berya. They said to him, a worm is different because that's how it's born. This is the entire worm. It says also one wheat. So first of all, it says clearly only wheat, and only wheat is shaykh to say berya. Only wheat and not flour. So Rabbi answers, you misunderstood the Mishnah. He's saying, look, according to me, even flour, Yochai Malchus, we'll soon see why. But you guys don't agree with me, but at least be made to me that if it's a stalk of wheat, it's a berya because you believe in the principle of berya. According to me, even flour. According to you, at least admit to me, the chita achas kibriyosa, that a kernel or a stalk of wheat, it's berya. Nu Rabbanan brias neshama chashuva. Only if it's a living thing, it's chashuv. And chita, wheat, is not a living thing. It's a tzemeach, and live aloi chashuva. Tases, I want to understand, with the Gemara, we said that a gid hanosh is a berya. Gid hanosh is not a living thing. It's cut out from the animal. It's the thigh. It's the attic nerve node. Sorry? Oh, so he said maybe because it comes from a living thing. And Taser dismisses that. And he lays down a very important rule, the definition of a berya. It doesn't really mean a living thing. What it means is as follows. If it's something that if you cut it in half, it's no longer it retains its original name, it loses chshibah. So its whole significance is only when it's complete. That's called a berya. But if you cut it down, it's the same thing, just smaller size, then that's not a berya, because it really doesn't matter. Big, small, it's the same thing. It's only when you cut it and you lose its original. Tanya goes to Rav Shimon says, Kol shul lemakis because I need carbon. No standard rule of Rav Shimon. We'll learn more about it in Shavuos. Rav Shimon says, I hold of a principle called achshavei. I'm paraphrasing it. This is how the Chacham Tzvi explains it in the Shavuos, and so on. But achshavei means by me eating it, I make it chashuv. Otherwise, why am I eating it? If it's such a negligible amount, why am I spending my time eating it? The fact that I'm eating it means I'm giving it cheshivas. We find the same thing in Pesach, you mevatel something, but when you take it and you eat it, you gave it back as cheshivas. You sort of required it. So Rabbi Shimon holds kol shehu lemakis. As far as malchus is concerned, there's no shear, because the moment I eat it, I made it chashuv. I made it chashuv, and it's all relative. So they're not absolute rules relative. You know what the absolute rules are in the Torah? In Halach, Moshe, we had shiurim, kazayis, bay, all these things. That's as far as a carbon is concerned. Carbon is something that is not a punishment; it's a kapara, and therefore you need to follow the prescription of the Torah. And when do you require the kapara? If you had a kazayis, otherwise you don't. Whole different principle, nothing to do with burial. Next Mishnah, we're continuing with this period began with Eileen, and like in the following at Malchus, he continues. Ha'oichel bikurim. Bikurim is something you have to give the new fruit. You have to bring it to Yerushalayim between Shavuos and Chanukah, and you have to give it to a kohen. A Yisrael is not allowed to eat it. It's like Yechayiv Misa. When is a kohen able to start eating bikurim? When is a kohen able to eat bikurim? Now, there's a number of stages there. You bring it to the Shalayim, the whole parade. We'll learn about another time. And they then have to say psukim. In fact, the Haggadah is based on the psukim that you say there in Parshas Kisavai, rather than in Parshas Chumash Shmois, which in itself needs an explanation. But apart from that, is you say the whole thing. The story there. You say your praise to Hashem, you thank Hashem, and you have to place it in front of the mizbech. So the Mishnah says, if you did not yet say the psukim that you're supposed to say with the bikurim, it is not yet permitted for this. That's like the tithe for bikurim. It's part of the tithe, and the kohen cannot eat from that bikurim. So now we'll see in the Gemara. It's actually machlekes tanaim. What's pivotal here? Is it the saying those psukim say thank you, or is it placing it in front of the mizbech? But one or the other is ma'akim, and our Mishnah holds like that authority that says actually koralem. If you did not yet call it name, if a kohen eats it, they also chayv. There's like a zor because you're not allowed to eat it until after your kodesh. That's number one. Number two, kochik chutz klaim. If you ate kochim outside of the courtyard, klaim is in the Mishkan or outside the courtyard in the base of Mikdash. For as far as kochik is concerned, the holy korban is there. It's as if you took it out of its original place. You chayv malchus. In other words, in addition to each one of these things, there's a mitzvah saying the Torah. There's also now you're getting malchus allowed. Kochim kalim. When it comes to kochim kalim, like a thanks offering, you're allowed to eat it in the entire Yerushalayim and its environs, but not beyond the wall. Or ma'aser sheni chutz l'chaim. If you took it outside the wall, you'll get malchus for that. If you had a kosher korban pesach and you break the bone, the Torah says etzem l'tishbar, you're not allowed to break the bones. So therefore, if you break the bones, you're chayv. When are you chayv for breaking the bones for korban pesach? Only if there's marrow inside. So you're eating. It's not just a bone; it's fleshy bone. It's meaty bone. In fact, Tosfos and Tzvachim of Tzadik Zayin there on the base has a whole discussion. Why don't we say the asay, the mitzvah asay of eating the korban pesach? You tell me it only has marrow. There's a mitzvah to eat the marrow; it's meat. So why don't we say the mitzvah asay of eating korban pesach is doiche the loisasa of breaking the bone? So Tosfos there introduces a discussion, a concept called bi'idna. In order for an asay to reject a loisasa, it has to be in tandem, has to be concurrent. But hey, first you break the bone before you suck out the marrow. It's not bi'idna. And this raises the whole thing, the Shagazaria, Tosfos and Rabasi, the Gimel, and everyone talks about it. Because there we say that if you cannot get to step 2 without first doing step 1, it's considered as if it's concurrent. You cannot get to the marrow of the bone without breaking the bone. So therefore, it's not like 2 steps. It's all one and the same. It is considered bidna. The Tosfos question goes back. It's interesting. Either there's a cost or whatever. Talking about it further, so you get like Aboim. And all of these, you get malchus 40. In addition to that, say you get malchus. But if you left behind from your korban noiser, you don't get malchus. Why not? Either it's a lav hanitig lasei, the Torah tells you how to fix it, or we also had before 2 other reasons. It's a lav she'ein by ma'aser, you're not doing anything inactive, or we had a hashra suffix. You don't get malchus unless you're warned. How can we warn you? Do we know you can have leftovers? Or if you break the korban pesach when the korban pesach is not a Torah, and we learn from a pasuk, it says, "Boy, only while it's a proper korban pesach." Like aboim. Now we introduce Shulchan Aruch, which we already learned yesterday. The Torah says that you're supposed to shuwei lesikachem alabonim shalech to shalach haseim. Now, if you follow the order in the Torah, first it says you should not take the mother, and then it says lesikachem alabonim. You should not take the babies away while the mother's there. Then it says the asay shalech to shalach haseim. Sounds like it's a lav where the asay is there to remedy the lav. That's the view of the Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda holds, and there's different ways to understand Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda holds that here, even though physically it's written after the loisa, the asay is uncoupled from the loisa. There's a mitzvah when you go there, shalei seim, and there's a lav, lesikachem, 2 separate things. It's not here to remedy the lav at all, and therefore it's not that you'll be getting malchus on this because it's not It's not a lava nitting lasei. Big malchek is a shayim. Okay, I shouldn't have done it. I took do I still have a mitzvah not else to fix the asay, but does the mitzvah to fix the law? But does the mitzvah of shalish leim still continue? And some say yes, some say no. He's a night like you get malchus and mishaleh because it's not a lava nitting lasei. No, you send the mother away because it is a lava nitting lasei. Remember, we had a contribution. As long as the mother's alive, you can send away a month later. It's only when you kill the mother that you lose it. Bitly v'lei bitly. You have to do it straight away to remedy it. Our mission that says that what's critical by Big Kurim is saying those psukim and saying thank you. That's only according to Rabbi Akiva. It's placing in front of his bech. It's placing in front of his bech. That's what's critical. Kriya and the Kriya is not so important. So they both agree that whatever is the most important activity, if you didn't do that yet, even the Kohen cannot partake from that. Bikurim and will get Malchus. What they're only arguing is which activity is the most critical, even B'diyah. Why is it Rabbi Kiva? In fact, the Rabbi Kiva doesn't really say anybody that he holds that way. It's Rabbi Shimon himself. Rabbi Shimon says, "I'll tell you that Rabbi Kiva Shimon. Rabbi Kiva holds like Rabbi Shimon." And we're going to bring down in a minute which Rabbi Shimon we're talking about here. We doesn't tell you Rabbi Kiva holds like Rabbi Shimon, which obviously is the other way around. Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Kiva. In fact, we had before that there's Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, all of these Tam Sifra, Sifri, but Kul and the Libad Rabbi Akiva. They all follow Rabbi Akiva. So, says the mother, Rabbi Shimon, what's this Rabbi Shimon? We have a long Baraisa, and not like this. Every single thing that we learn right now is there's an assay. You're not allowed to do this, and if you did it, you're going to be even assay. Taking it out of the walls of the Shalayim, taking it out of the base of Migdash, eating before Zrika, all of these before you sprinkle the blood. All of these is the Torah already said that you're even aved if you do it. A mitzvah say. That Shimon now is coming to add a loisa on each one of them, even though the Torah says it clearly. Teach you do it, and go as follows. The Tanya we learn. It says in Pasuk. It's very important, this pasuk, because the pasuk mentions a whole range of things. It says in the pasuk you should not eat in your hometown. Then it says ma'aser degoncha v'sirochka v'tzerecha, cannot eat ma'aser. Then it says ubechoyros. Now normal reading would be bechoyros bekarcha v'tzerecha, the bechoyr of your cattle, but we're going to say that the Torah spells out. You could have just said bechoyros behemtecha. By saying bechoyros bekarcha v'tzerecha, it's talking each one is a different carbon. And then the chon zerecha, what carbon is that? I should that you made a promise. The nidveisecha, and what covers that? Utruma shedechem, what's that? All of that loy suchal. There's one lav that covers it all. So we're going to now spell out what each one of these is, and Shimon is saying it's adding another layer besides the avera asay. You also have a loiser, and this is how it works. What Shimon is going to do is he's going to go for the pasuk backwards. He's going to work his way. He's going to misaris the crow. He's going to reverse the pasuk and work backwards. This side. Can we learn the trumas yachcha? It says the pasuk, including the trumas yachcha, you must eat in your Yerushalayim. What are we referring to? Eile bekurim. Bekurim sometimes are called trumas. Oh, but Rab Shimon says ma bozel lamdeinu, because bekurim goes to the kohen, and we're good, and that's like truma. Bekurim is Santa Batana Yotcha, you give it to the kohen, so it's like truma. Now, what's it come to teach you? We already know. What's it come to teach you? If the you're not allowed to eat it outside the shalayim, I know that already. The beginning of the passage talks about maisa. Once you tell me that maisa lesucha lecha b'shrecha you cannot eat in your hometown. In other words, where do you got to eat the maisa sheni? You got to eat the maisa sheni. Where do you got to eat it? In the shalayim. So maisa, which is so lenient, you have to eat in the shalayim. What do you think when it comes to bekurim? You chai miso kinds of things. What do you think? And the Gemara later will explain the chumrah in each one. Why this is Muhammad the Maisa? Ma Maisa kal oichel chudchayim like you malka because says lo suchalechu is bekurim like koshkein. So of course is of course yichai malka yichai malka eating outside of the wall. So what's another aved here? Hakamash halabakas loichem kurim. Even though Torah doesn't spell it out, is coming to give you a lav if you eat from the bekurim before you did whatever is critical. And he says clearly, so this is the Rab Shimon that says that what's the critical activity you have to do by bekurim is to say those. Okay, then the passage continues. We'll work our way backwards. The nidveisecha, what kind of carbon is it? And it's an adova. do toida or shlamim. You don't have to give the carbon. I'm going to give a thanks offering. No. So it's coming to tell you that also toida shlamim is what? Not to eat it outside of the shrine. A kabel chayim from Meiser. To tell you, I already know that. However, I was going to tell you, if somebody eats from the Torah Shlom before you do, it's critical. Avoid which is sprinkling the blood. Lifnei zika, shulaika. I don't care who you are, you'll get malchus. Okay, so now we know that. And this is called imeina inyan. If it does nothing to teach you regarding the chayma, which the pasuk is talking about, then obviously it teaches you something else. And this is we're coming up with something else. Rav Shimon says, the next thing it says is Ubechaydes. He jumps a little bit ahead in front of Bakar. Remember, he's going. He's not really doing an order either way. He's starting backwards and working a little bit away back. Ubechaydes. Now, what? Also, you're not allowed to eat in the slime. Obviously, you're not allowed to eat outside the slime. Maz bozel lamden. What does Chay come teach you? We know from Isa. Because Chay is even stricter than that. I will see more later. Why is Chay stricter? Because it's born holy. Everything else you have to make holy. Because of another halach. If you're not a kohen and you even a I feel even after you sprinkle the blood, you did everything right, but you're not a kohen. So who like it? You're not only even I say that you have to give it to the kohen, but you get malchus. Okay. Then the pasuk says, but now we're going back to normal order. The karcha v'tzaincha. What carbon are we talking about? They could have said behemtecha. When we karcha v'tzaincha, zu chatas v'asham. Now what about that? That you can't eat it outside of whatever is the dinama. We already have a kavachayim. Rav Shimon, ma bozel alamdein. Im loichen chutz l'chayim ali yatzad yishlayim kavachayim ma'is. Im lifnei zika, before you sprinkle the blood, the kohen cannot take from his parts over there. Kavachayim mitayde shlamim. Chatz v'asham is much stricter than tayde shlamim. Im la'achaz zika, to tell you that what? That Yisrael cannot eat from those parts at the zika kavachayim b'chayim. Because chatas and asham is even stricter than b'chayim, as we'll see later. It comes from kapara. So what's it come to teach you? What din regarding chatzas and asham? It comes to teach the next stage. Chatzas asham kachim. Those not only you cannot eat it outside Yerushalayim, you cannot even eat it in Yerushalayim. It has to be dafka inside the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash or in the Mishkan by the Kohen. Even I bring the chutzah Kohen outside the curtains. If you like it, you get malchus. Okay. Niddarecha. The pasuk says there, "V'chol derecha." Now we're going in all order. What the carbon are we talking about here? Zu oila. Oila gets completely consumed on the mizbeach. What's that coming to teach you? To teach you outside the wall. Before sprinkling the body, oil is stricter because the tithing is burnt. After sprinkling the blood, that Yisrael, over in this case, even a kohen, because the oil is stricter. But you cannot eat it outside of the courtyard. All about kosher. What's it coming to teach you? If you eat from the oil, afilu bifnim, even inside the Beis Hamikdash, you're not allowed to shalaika. Of course you're not allowed to have an asay. What he's doing is he's adding a loisasa for each one, and you get malchus. Omar Rav said the most beautiful thing. Delay the ime. If your mother is about to give birth to a child, kirab shimetel, you should mispaul. You want to have a child like Hashem Yochai. But if you don't have a child Hashem Yochai, like Taylor, I'd rather not have the child. The Ritva and the other Shem completely take that out. They said, if my son's not Hashem Yochai, there's plenty of levels, he says, between, a simple person of Hashem Yochai. Why can't be any of the other ones? Someone to say, the lady, if you remember in the beginning of Sanhedrin, we had machlekes of yesh aim lemikra or yesh aim lemeseris. How are you supposed to read the Torah? But the mastery of the Torah is the way it's written or the way you read it. Is the word aim. And this is what it's saying here. The lady ime, if you know how to read the psukim, Kirab Shimon, like he just did right now, he took a pasuk, completely butchered it up, but learned that so many minutes in. Then fine, learn. But like Taylor, if not, don't play around with the Torah. Which is nice. So anyway, then he continues. Then continues. I'm giving such a beautiful blessing. You should know that everything he said now I can undermine. Nothing he said is right. And he always asks them, what's the big brach? Because each one, whatever he'll explain out the chumrah in each one, because he's saying, but this is more chumrah. And then the Rebbe will say, but that one also has a chumrah over this. So how do you know which way to learn? So for example, you're starting out saying, Bekurim is stricter than Meiser. My chumrah is Bekurim and Meiser. Why is Bekurim stricter than Meiser? For example, Meiser Sheni, anybody eats in Yerushalayim. Mashenkin bekurim, you can only eat my coin. Nu adraba ma'isa chomer shekain also lo'inen. If somebody's lost a parent, they're not allowed to they're not allowed to eat ma'isa sheni. But according to this view, they can eat bekurim. Machlek bekur can't, but this view should hold you could. So just because you're focusing on one chumrah, I have a contrary chumrah. How do you know which chumrah is what makes this halacha, this particular halacha? So maybe the Torah has to tell you that bekurim also you cannot eat outside the shalom because otherwise you wouldn't know. Okay, then you continue. You said Teidur Shlamim is stricter. My chumna Teidur Shlamim, then Maisa, she came to Unen, Matan Domin, Bimba Unen Gamazbech. When it comes to a Teidur Shlamim, by Maisa, you eat the whole thing. Teidur Shlamim, you got to give part of it to the Mizbech. And right, you have to give sprinkle blood, you put the fat in the Mizbech. Right, that's the chumra of Teidur Shlamim. It's a carbon. No other Abba. Ma'isa chomer, she came to unin kesef tzudeh. If a carbon trader, for example, gets a psul but has a defect, you can then go redeem it. You give him any kind of money or any value. When it comes to ma'isa sheni, you can only trade it on b'tzarta hakesef b'yochel. Trader says b'tzarta hakesef. That means it has to have a kesef with a tzura. It has to be well minted coins that it could be tradable everywhere. Very limited to what you can use to redeem. Once you redeem it to money, you can trade for other things. But it's very limited to what you can redeem it for. So that has a chumrah. Okay, then continue. You said, what's a chumrah b'chayr? B'tayr shlamim. Why b'chayr stricter than shlamim? She can't do shasi melechem. It's born holy. Every carbon you have to make this, sanctify it. This was born holy. Adrabah. Toyde v'shlamim chamurin. There's so many activities. She can't do it. You need smicha. You have to lean on it, and because all you might if you had with a carbon, you got to bring wine libations. The tenufas chazay v'sheg, you have to take it and wave it. You know the part to put it, you give it the coin, you got to wave it. So there's a chumrah in Teidur Shlamim that you don't have by b'chor. You don't do any of that. You know smicha and so on. So maybe that's why Teidur Shlamim you're not leading Teidur Shlamim. So you need to say in each one what it is. Then you say chatzos is stricter than b'chor. Why is chatzos stricter than b'chor? She can't cut your kachim. Could have cut your kachim. But I'll argue, is born holy. Even a chatzos ashim, you had to consecrate the animal. It doesn't happen automatically. Then the last thing is, you said oil is stricter than everything. Why is oil stricter? Chatzos ashim simply she can't coal because the entire carbon gets burnt on the mizbech. I can argue chatzos ashim chamidi. She can't mechapri. That the whole purpose is to mechaper and aloisa, even though a carbon oil also we said is mechaper and asay, and it shows you how strong it is that it has this capacity. So maybe that's why you're not allowed to eat it outside the shrine. We're going to do all these other things. Anyway, so therefore, the kulan chamidim oil, and now I'll tell you better. All the other things you mentioned are stricter than other. You know why? All the kabbanis. The east bush the achilles. Oil is only for the Eibishter. All I'm on, you share part to the Eibishter, part to me. My the lady make Rab Shimon. So what do you compliment Rab Shimon? You are you dominating Rab Shimon means things all wrong. So the my the sweeter lady day. The way he holds Mesadas for the crow, he knew exactly how to turn the top pushing around the Dodishly. Exactly what is the compliment if you learn Pashtup Shot? That he knows how to be krum. If the halach is not like him and whatever he says is correct, so he knows how to be krum and take a pasuk totally out of his normal shot to come up with a conclusion which is wrong, and you're praising him. So we did have Marson Head in the first paragraph. It says that if you want to be a dayan, you have to be able to retire or sheriff for kufnun time. You have to be a lateral thinker. You can look at every situation and flip it on his head. That's what you want. We want you to be the shoftu aid of itziled. We want you to be able to see things, and even though it's so obvious to everybody in one particular way, you see it differently. We want lateral thinkers, and maybe over here, maybe that's what I was trying to say. He's a lateral thinker, you know. But if you learn the other pshat, we said that it means yesh ein lemikra, yesh ein l'seides. So that's what he's trying to say. That if you know how to learn chumash, forget about the fact if the halachically is correct or not correct, but you know how to use it, be a master of the words of the Torah. That's what he means. In fact, we had a Kedushin. Why they're called Seifrim? They knew how to count every word of the Torah, every letter in the Torah. They were perfect. The Chimaz Hidim Menadim. We had this whole principle that you don't punish from a Kal V'Chaymer, nor do you find a warning. Remember, every time you get punished, it has to be a separate pasuk telling you not to do it. And here you tell me it's all a Kal V'Chaymer, but you give Malkus or Kal V'Chaymer, even though we did have one opinion, Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak holds Onshim Menadim. We had before because he uses that pasuk Basa Chayse or Basim or something else. Therefore, he holds Onshim Menadin. But the general consensus is ain't Onshim Menadin. And Nachman, I feel about Ladin, ain't Mazir Ladin, but nevertheless, when it comes to the Azhara, when it comes to the warning, don't do this, you can't use a Kalbachim. It has to be explicit in the Torah, or at least implicit. And the Gemara, Isura Ba'alma. He says Malchus doesn't mean Malchus. Malchus means he meant Lavin without the Malchus. So what's the point? He's saying that there's a layer, the Torah said all of these are Vedas, and I say, and now you also be able to Lav, but don't get Malchus the point. The Torah earlier that sort of asks, if a Lav and Nitgal say you don't get Malchus, so what's the point of having a Lav? The whole idea of a Lav is to get Malchus. If you tell me it's a Lav and Nitgal, say you don't get Malchus, or a Lav Shema Maisa, so what's a Lav? So Taisa basically says is just because you don't get punished, it's still a lav, and maybe in a way it's stronger than I say from a certain perspective. I mean, Hashemayim you'll get punished. Let's
say fix it up.
Yeah, but if you okay, so well, let's say you if you wouldn't battle it, for example, you'll never get the malchus or a lav she'ema ma'isa. So what's the point of having a lav if I'll never get malchus? So he's saying a lav doesn't mean malchus. Malchus is a consequence. Lav is a lav, and in Hashemayim you get punished. So it's still an avera. Anyways, it means he didn't mean malchus literally. He meant isur. Want to ask a question? It says Rabbi once said that if a zor, a yisro, eats from a korban oila, look how many averas he does. He's a yisro, not a kohen. He ate from a korban oila that no one should be eating from because it gets totally burnt. Where when lifnei zig before you sprinkled, and any carbon you're not allowed to eat before you sprinkle. Third Aveda. Chutz l'kaima, outside the shlime, fourth Aveda. Outside the base of Mikdash, fifth Aveda, because it's an oil. Rab Shimon loika chamish, you get 5 malchus. Clearly, it says it loika. As the Gemara chamisha isurin have, even though he used the word loika, he meant that 5 isurin. As the Gemara loikin, this whole masech, this whole perik begins with the words Eloheina loikin, and then our Mishnah mentions the case of Eba Bikurim. And you're telling me no, you don't get malchus for it. It only means it's an issue. It says Eloheina loikin. Moshe is right. I'll reverse what I just said. Of course you get malchus. Elekro, you say to who this entire pasuk of Lesucha Lechel is the breakdown of all of these categories is already mentioned mentioned twice in that same parsha, a few psukim apart. And if an entire pasuk is extra, because it says before already about Shama, and it goes through all the different categories as well. And all you have to say then afterwards is Lesucha Lechel b'sharecha, or Lesucha Lechlam b'sharecha. You're not allowed to eat it anything. The pasuk before, I'm linking it to the pasuk before. Why wait 7 psukim and then repeat the whole exercise again? And then go through the whole thing again. This entire pasuk seems to be redundant. It says in the pasuk, and it goes through every one of them goes right through them. You should eat it before the Eibush. So that's that mitzvah say. Then you want to give you a lav, so the pasuk should have been following this pasuk. And let it go right afterwards. Why did it have to spell it out again? And it wouldn't have been you can argue to lav shebechlolos. If you have one loy seichlam on a number of avedas, you don't get malchus for each one. That's why they had to spell it out. He says no, because since you spelled out each Aveda, and we had before. You've done many lavin, and then you say, and you bunch them all together, let's say, lecha, sharecha, after you already itemized each one, it's just, you get malchus each one. That's not a lav shulchavos. So why does the Torah then make another pasuk to tell you that you actually get malchus for each one? It's not only in Asay that you get malchus for each one. Okay, we'll stop over here. See you tomorrow.